Let's see. So this is Dan York, and I'm here with Chris DiBona, who is the open source manager, director. What are you?
Programs manager.
Programs manager for Google. So Chris, you're the sponsor of IETF 73.
Well, I'm not, and Google is the sponsor.
So Google is. So why? What are you doing?
Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but IETF's work with zoos around the world to preserve species from extinction has been epic. I mean, the red-tailed elephant was endangered for no. So I could go on like that if you like.
Oh, I'm sure you could. Yeah, it'd be an entertaining show.
So we sponsor IETF for a couple of reasons. In case you haven't heard, Google is a search company.
We help search?
Yeah, so we help you find things on the internet.
On the internet.
The internet is this globally connected network of computers that have information on them.
It's true.
And so what we do is we crawl this global network, the internet. And,
the internet network, the tubes.
The tubes. And
you crawl through the tubes.
Yes, well, it's not a dump truck. And we haven't been drinking. This is just a day of standing work.
A day of ATF.
That's what it does to you. No, seriously. So Google exists on top of this pile of open standards and open source called the internet, right?
Yeah.
And for those viewers who don't realize it, most of the internet runs on top of open source software, whether it's DNS, HTTP, FTP, you name it, right? And so open source is intimately connected with the standards that create what we consider the internet today. So as a company that lives and dies on the internet, keeping the internet a competitive, free, and open space for us to compete on is very, very important to us. Anyway, so Google exists on top of this global net of basically what is open source software and open standards. So we're incentivized to look after it and say, okay, how can we keep open source healthy? How can we keep open standards healthy? Right? And one of the most important bodies for open standards on the internet is the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF. And so when IETF asked if Google was interested in being a host, they asked Vint, and Vint and I talked to a couple folks at the company. We're like, sure, this sounds like a fine thing to do. Can't do it every time, but it's important enough that we should do it a couple of times here and there. So there you go. That's why we sponsored the IETF 73.
And in fact, I've seen a number of your folks here participating in
we care deeply about the specifications that come out of the IETF. So.
Yeah. So now your job is managing open source as well. So tell us a little bit about what do you do?
So I sort of I'm two people, right? On one side,
you are?
Yes.
Really? I only see one.
Well, you should listen a little more carefully.
I just look this way, look that way.
So we,
the royal we.
So I'm two people. I'm a compliance person.
A compliance person,
and a outreach person. So I have a team of people who work on both of those things. And compliance means all the code from the open source world we bring into the company needs to be looked after, right? Because it has licenses that have certain requirements, right? And so we know about those requirements. We know about those kinds of softwares and the people who create it. And so we're able to give a very engineering-focused view of compliance of the company.
Yeah, if somebody were to say that Google was in violation of the GPL, for instance, that would be bad.
That would be very bad, and we would take it very, very seriously. And so it's our job to A, keep that from happening, and B, when we do make a mistake, because we are human, that we deal with it in a professional, calm, and extremely fast manner. A good example of this was about a year ago. The libjingle project that we released, which allows people to do signaling the same way that we do over XMPP for voice. Now, when we released that, it was released under the BSD license, and it included also a GPL library that would be invoked only if you didn't have the GIFs codec installed in your system, which if you didn't have Google Talk or some other program like Skype who had licensed GIFs, it would use this by default. Right? And that would allow libjingle to service the free software community really, really well. And we wanted basically Speaks to be the fallback codec for people who are using XMPP to do voice, because it's the logical codec to use. Right. Speaks or anyway.
Whatever it was.
The OGG one.
Oh, OGG Vorbis one.
No, it's not OGG Vorbis. Well, it'll do OGG Vorbis for audio, but it's the video that does streaming. I think it's not video. The the one that's specifically for streaming. I think it speaks, but anyway. So it would conditionally compile this thing, but that library was into the GPL. So in that condition, the whole thing would become GPL.
Of course.
And yet we had listed it as BSD'd. And so we had made basically a procedural error.
Right.
So what we did is we looked at who was actually using the library, and it was all GPL programs, so we just relicensed everything into the GPL. That said, the individual files inside the libjingle project are still BSD'd, but the project as a whole would be GPL because of the inclusion of that one file. So we made a mistake, and this was 3 years ago we released this stuff. So it was reported to us via some folks in Europe, and we're like, oh, well, it's only kind of a violation, but who cares? Right, because people who are savvy enough to want to use libjingle will see the BSD license on the files, and they'll see the GPL license on that other file, and they'll do the right thing for them. And so we just license it into the GPL because it is technically correct that there is an instantiation of this project that could be considered that way. So these are the kind of issues we deal with. And also, Google is a company of some 20,000 people now. So we're going to make mistakes. And so it's a measure of our compliance regime that we say, okay, every once in a while we're going to make mistakes. How do we deal with it? Right. What's our strategy? What's our plan for dealing with that mistake?
So one side of you is the compliance guy.
Yeah, so the other side is the outreach guy. So we make a point of interacting with the outside world at a professional and what I consider computer science level. So we've now for 4+ years worked very closely with the open source community to create more open source developers and release a lot of code. So over the last 4 years we've released about 14 million lines of code. Whether that's in the form of patches to existing projects, new projects coming from the company, and very, very large projects like Chrome and Android, right? So Chrome, Android by itself is something like 8 million lines of code. We generally release about 1 million lines of code a year, absent those big projects. Right. So yeah, and that's incredibly challenging and very time-consuming to do all the license work around that. And so we spend a lot of time doing that. And then we also have the Summer of Code, which creates new open source developers and helps out a variety of projects. We had 175 organizations taking part this year with 1,100 students distributed amongst them.
Wow.
And that's it's a significant investment. And that created this year about 3 million lines of code.
Wow.
So we're trying to do this big, almost retail model of creating more open source developers and more open source. And it's really exhausting, but it's very rewarding actually, because having the ability to do that in a company like Google is surprising.
Yeah.
I've worked for large companies before. I've worked for the government before, and I think that Google, at the executive level as well as the engineer level, has internalized this idea that software is something you can share, and computer science is something we can all advance together, and then that's good for the company, as opposed to that being losing some strategic juice here and there. But again, Google is built on top of the free and fair and competitive internet. So if we can keep that internet free and fair and competitive and exciting and compelling, then it's really good for us, because we know how to monetize that, right? We have search, and then we have ads that runs on search, and we have ads that run on other people's websites, and we're pretty good at targeting. So when you put that together, that's what sustains the company, right? So if we can keep that environment exciting and vital and useful, then it's very good for us. And also, we consume so much of this software that giving back software is the right thing to do, because if for no other reason, and this is actually not the guiding principle of our work, but if for no other reason, we are incentivized as a company to keep open source healthy because we use so much of it.
Cool.
Right? So,
great.
there you go.
Well, thanks.
Sure.
Thanks.
Happy to do it.
I'm talking to Chris DiBona, who is the
Hi.
Open Source Program Manager for Google.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you. It keeps Dan happy. Email me if you need to.